All right, let's go.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning into this week's edition of the Don Cherry Grapevine podcast. And this week, we're going to run a 1989 interview with Danny Gallivan. Now, for those who don't know who Danny Gallivan is, to me, he is the greatest play-by-play broadcaster in hockey history, Hockey Night in Canada history. Now, I know we had a lot of greats. Bob Cole's right up there. And, of course, you have Foster Hewitt, but to me, Danny Gallivan was the greatest. Mostly did the Montreal Canadian games. He had such a silky smooth voice that brought such texture to his calls. Of course, he came up with some great ways to describe the game. One, of course, is his favorite Savardian Spinorama. And that night, we actually did 3 shows with Kevin McGuire, Ricky Vive, and Danny Gallivan. So here we go, a 1989 interview with the great Danny Gallivan.
This week at the Grapevine, we get the best sports announcer ever, Danny Gallivan. Let's go. Well, welcome to the Grapevine. Now, first of all, 3 years, 50 goals right there. Ricky Vive right there. Hey, Ricky there. And Laura. Kevin McGuire, Buffalo's tough guy. Right here. Give him there. You remember Danny Gallivan?
Of course, he's a legend.
Isn't he beauty?
One of the best.
You know, you go to breakfast with Danny. This is the truth. You go to breakfast, you sit down, and people come over. You listen to his voice. You think he's doing a hockey game. He's unbelievable. I remember the very first time I met him. Like I was a minor leaguer, and Danny Gallivan. I mean, Danny Gallivan. I couldn't believe it. It was unbelievable. You know, we got in trouble here in one time with Channel 11. Leafs were doing, you weren't playing, but the Leafs were playing, I forget, Colorado or something, and it was a lousy first period as usual, right? So I said, he asked me, well, what'd you think of that period, Don? And I says, well, I'll tell you, that's the worst period of hockey I've ever seen. And he says, yes, Mr. Cherry, I have to believe that. It was like a hobo's coat, shabby. We got the letter. And I'm telling you, it was unbelievable. He was tough enough selling this game without you guys doing that. But I'll tell you something, I love him. This guy is, to me, is a Canadian gentleman. Don't you go away. We're going to come back with one of the greatest guys in the world, Danny Gallivan. Don't you go away. Well, welcome back, my buddy, Danny Gallivan. What a guy. Thank you, Danny, for coming. Listen. I've got to get in the questions good for you. Everybody said, ask Danny this, ask Danny that, ask that. When did you get in to broadcasting, and where did you start?
I got into broadcasting in the spring of 1943. I was just graduated from college, and with a BA, what can you do with a BA? Thank goodness a radio station opened.
Well, I never got a BA myself, tell you. What's a BA mean?
Well, a BA means that you have all kinds of money like you.
Oh, yeah.
At times.
That's true.
And it means that you look for a job.
Yeah.
You had been there for 4 years not doing anything, and then you look for another loaf.
Well, how did you get into it? Like what?
Well, I got into it because the radio station opened, had very close affiliation with the university, St. Francis Xavier. As a matter of fact, they intended to use the radio station to disseminate the educational program that they have there, adult education. And it was supposed to be non-commercial. We were on the air about a week when you found out by sending educational signals that you couldn't live by that alone. So we had to go commercial. We weren't on the basic network of the CBC. That it meant that we had to do all the programming. And so the manager said, well, we got to put something on the air, and you're interested in sport, do the college hockey games, the football games, and the boxing and all that.
Boy.
And I always loved sport, and that was the opening.
And you went on from there. Now, what's the difference when you and Dick, like that was back, like you and Dick were going, what's the difference now say back about 20 years ago in broadcasting?
Well, if you're talking about broadcasting as such, let's take it to the major league level,
Yeah.
National Hockey
Yeah.
League, when you bring Dick in. I would say the big difference is the entourage, the number of people you have with you. When I started, first of all, you went on the air, say, at 8 o'clock, and there was no one there to help you. I always used to be a disaster in giving commercial breaks, and I had to do them myself and miss most of them. But then after a few years, and I'll tell you how the color man started. You'd be interested in this. In 1957, the Canadians had wrapped up their series, and I was asked to go down to Boston to do a New York Rangers-Boston game. And I was up there on the catwalk or whatever it is there, beautiful spot from which to broadcast a game in Boston. And Frank Selke Jr. came along as sort of a producer of some sort. But I was doing the talking, giving the cues and everything, and there was a wild pile up in front of the net, and the puck got caught up in somebody's paraphernalia. We couldn't find it.
Did you start that paraphernalia?
Well, I don't know if I did or not.
Yeah.
But anyway, I said, there's no puck. I said, Frank, just like that, Frank, we got to get the puck. They didn't have buckets of pucks like they have today.
Yeah.
I said, it's rather essential if we're going to play hockey to have a puck. And Frank came out with some astute observation. And Ted Huff was back in Toronto. And he was listening. And Ted said, you know, that sounded good, another voice. And from that day on came the color man, the analyst.
That's why I'm sitting here today, on account of Frank Selke doing that, right?
Well, you give him 10% of your earnings, which
All right.
would be, which would be considerable. And one other change, the facilities. Some of the rinks were absolutely atrocious from which to do hockey games. I remember in '53, my first year, doing a series between Chicago and Montreal. And Canadians were down in the series 3-2, and Rick was talking about the crowd in Chicago. And we did the game from the organ loft down the end.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And it was a big night for Montreal because I would say perhaps the greatest shakeup in the history of the Stanley Cup, even greater than the drilling benching in '42. Dick Irvin decided to bench 4 of his regulars. He brought up Eddie Mazer, Callum McKay, Lauren Davis, and a guy that was wearing a toque, Jacques Plante. And Jacques came in that night and he shut out Chicago. But I remember the first goal. Jeffrey on, I lost him at center ice. He went into the smoke.
Oh, yeah.
I couldn't see the other end of the rink. And the only reason why I knew there was a goal, the red light came through the smoke.
Oh, yeah.
So the facilities were just, gosh, awful.
You could get away with a lot more on radio than you could on
Well,
television.
yes, because who could tell whether if you said lock? Really, Richard had it. They tell a famous story about Clem McCarthy, who was the top harness racing broadcaster in the States. And there was great competition between him and Bill Stern. Bill Stern was doing football on radio. And Clem McCarthy was doing on television one time, and he called the wrong horse.
Oh, jeez. Yeah.
And Stern was very critical of him.
Yeah.
And someone went to Clem McCarthy and he said, you know, your buddy Stern has been criticizing you for naming the wrong horse. Well, he said, there's no problem. Stern does his on radio. You know, if you lateral to Bertelli and O'Grady picks it up, you could change it, then everybody knows.
Yeah.
But he said, how in the hell do you lateral a horse?
Yeah, I'll tell you, television, they've got that eye on you like that. Yeah. Now, where are you living, and what are you doing now? A lot of people...
Well, I'm still living in Montreal.
Yeah.
Let me see, I came in '52. My golly, 37 years. I'm doing a fair amount of work on the banquet circuit.
For Molson's?
Well, the first 2 years I retired, I stayed on with Hockey Night in Canada to do that type of work. And I indicated I'd be willing to do 20. I did 35 the first year and 33 the next. And then I decided I'd go on my own so that I could dictate and do fewer. But I enjoy freeloading, so do you.
Yeah, but it's tough. I won't do ever, I'll tell you. In the States, they call it the chicken circuit with roast beef here. Everything's roast beef.
Well, it's very difficult. You're in such demand.
That's true.
You know, it was a coup for me to be able to go to the people in Halifax at the golf tournament and said, Don Cherry will be our guest speaker.
I was great too, wasn't I?
You were outstanding.
Listen.
It's, I shouldn't take lightly of this, but it's wonderful. They found the gene now that causes the cystic fibrosis.
Yeah.
That came just after our tournament.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I tell you, you couldn't have got any more buddy in there with a shoehorn. It was something.
And then all the people coming up and looking for your autograph.
Yeah, that was great. Boy, it was hot in there though, Danny. I was really sweating.
Oh well.
But I put lots of liquid back in after. We had a lot of fun. Now, you know the thing that I used to really love. I go to the games now, and we got to be there at 2 o'clock. Don Wallace is out here. Don Wallace, a good friend of mine, was the head of Hockey Night Can. Got to be down there at 3 o'clock all the time, eh? And by the time the game comes, I used to be half asleep. You used to come in just before the game, fresh, ready to go.
I almost lost. I'm sure that I came close to being fired a number of times because I insisted on not coming to the ring. Because what was there for me to do at that meeting? They couldn't tell me who was going to pass to whom for the hockey game. It's all right for Dick and you fellas to go there. You've got things to do, interviews to do.
I didn't know what was going on either.
And I would say, look, psychologically, I'm licked by game time. And so I wouldn't come down. And Rene did the same thing. And I think I was right. Obviously, I was right because I wasn't fired. I quit.
Yeah. You know, I remember you standing there. You used to have that beautiful, you just looked a beautiful cigarette holder. The hair was back and everything. And here we are all waked out. And he'd come in and he'd stand up there and just go over the players. You were fresh and ready to go. Now, when did you come up with spinorama and cannonading? I don't say that right.
Well, you do it well, better than I did. Spinorama, I remember in 66, 67. That's when the National Hockey League expanded. And I take issue with Kevin and with you about this expansion. We'll get into that later.
Yeah.
They were too ambitious in their expansion in 1967. They brought in 6 teams, too many, with the result that the Canadians were a powerhouse then, as they have been so often. You know that.
Keeps bringing that up all the time, folks.
I remember in the fall of 67, Minnesota coming up in for their first game. And their objective was to keep the score down. What happened? They were shooting the puck down the ice in the first period.
Well, you like that icing.
Oh, I love that icing. And I remember Toe Blake said after, that was without doubt the worst hockey game he had ever seen. So I was having difficulty. I found it boring saying the same thing over and over. And if I felt boring, I'd say to myself, I'd never say it publicly, but I'd say to myself, how boring it must be for the people home watching it. And I remember a couple of weeks later going to Oakland. The Oakland Seals.
Oh, yeah.
To do that game. And I walked down the street, and in those days, everything was Rama. Bolorama, everything was Rama. So I remember the first rush was made on Savard's side. And he had that habit of stopping and spinning around. And in my mind, I was thinking that afternoon if I could work in some of that. And I called it spinorama. Then when I came back, I looked for a little alliteration, and Savard starts with an S, so I called it a Savardian spinorama. Yeah. It made it sound like a hell of a play, but there was nothing to it. But cannonading, I didn't, that wasn't by design, that was by accident. Oh, yeah. Canadians were on the power play down the south end. I visualize it as if it were yesterday. And they had Beliveau at center, Rocket right wing, Moore left wing, Harvey on the left point, and Boom Boom on the right point.
Geez, that's pretty good power play.
Heck of a power play. So anyway, there was, as we call, a false start. So I had a few extra seconds. You give a broadcaster a few extra seconds. He starts to think something is going to happen.
Yeah.
And I visualized Beliveau getting that puck back to Geoffrion. And Geoffrion had a great... Every hockey player today, I'd say every hockey player, shoots the puck harder than Geoffrion did. Yeah. But in those days...
Ricky Vive.
Vive. Put it right through you. But you had even Gordy had a good shot in those days. Bobby Holland.
Yeah.
But Boom Boom had the big boom boom
Yeah.
shot. And I visualized that coming back, and by golly, didn't Beliveau get it right back in his stick? And I visualized that going off his stick just like a cannon, and that's what it did. And I said, cannonading shot. I knew right away there was no such word, and I made a mistake. And I felt badly that night for 3 or 4 days.
Yeah.
Until 4 days later, I got a letter from some pseudo-English professor from some college. And he said, "How dare you? There is no such word." Oh, that annoyed me. I wrote back, I said, "How dare you? There is now."
You should see some of the letters I get from the English departments. I'll tell you that. It's unbelievable.
But let's face it. I said it in the introduction down in Dartmouth, and I said it tonight, earlier. You're the most controversial, most colorful, and you've got them where you want them. I wish when I was working for Hockey Night in Canada that I was as indispensable to Hockey Night in Canada.
Oh, geez, what a guy. I like this.
I was on an open line program not long ago. Often they ask about Don Cherry. And one fella made the remark. He said, you know, he's the best part of the show at times when the hockey game is dull. We stay there till the bitter end to hear what Cherry is going to say. We do not agree with him, but he's honest. You're honest, eh?
Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes I'm honest. Now listen, I'm always asked, ask Danny what is All-Star game. If you ever get him on, now what's your All-Star? Start just the six guys.
Well, no, it isn't so difficult. I'm going to have duplication in a few positions, if you don't mind.
All right.
Terry Sawchuk would be my goaltender.
Okay. Yeah. Beauty.
Doug Harvey and Orr.
Oh.
Well, no question there. On left wing, Bobby Hull.
Yeah. Kill you with that shot.
And I'm going to have duplication at center. Gretzky and Beliveau. Now, don't call me a homer. Beliveau was a great
I like Beliveau. He's a good guy.
And I cannot pick Gordie Howe and leave Rocket Richard off, and I cannot pick Rocket Richard and leave Gordie Howe off, so I pick both of them.
Right.
Imagine the great, I leave off a guy like Bossy. So you know how difficult it is. But you asked me for
All right, that's good. Now, the Rockets got to be the most exciting hockey player.
No question about it. I was singularly lucky to get the job in Montreal, to be in the right place at the right time, but to come when the Rocket was in his heyday. And you had to be a pretty dumb broadcaster not to make the game sound exciting when he was there. You know, he knew one thing, and he knew it well. And he had dedication and love that many hockey players today could copy. Go down and put that puck in the net, and that backhand from the wrong wing. And you know what? His ability to come through in the clutch. Look at the record books. He's got 6 overtime goals, the playoffs. In 1951, Detroit finished 27 points ahead of them. And they went into Detroit for 2 games. Both went into second and third overtimes. He scored the winning goal in each of the games. And I remember one night, Boston was playing, Boston again, in the playoff game.
Same old story.
In 57. Boston, Canadians had the game won for all intents and purposes. But Jacques Plante, who wasn't worked too hard that night, Jacques was worried about how he would come out and bow to the people.
Yeah.
And Horvat came to center and got clear of the puck. And Jacques was caught in between. He went on this side, he came out the other side.
Yeah.
And Horvat followed up and put it in. In those days, we didn't have provision for overtime. We had nobody lined up, but there was always one man was available, Frank Selke Sr. And he made a name for himself that night on television. Tom Foley said, "Mr. Selke, we're overtime. We have nobody. Would you come on?" Again, he said, "Now." He came on. He looked right into the camera. Tom said to him, "Tom, Mr. Foley, you must be Mr. Selke, you must be terribly disappointed." "Yes," he said, "we had the game won." A stupid play. Didn't mention Plante by name. But he said, I'll tell you this much, Tom. I have a man who will be out on that ice in the overtime who has never let me down in the clutch. 2:38 into the overtime, rocket, put it in the net.
Put her in the net.
The same thing has happened. This may have made you, as a matter of fact.
Who?
You. Remember we did a game one night the Islanders were playing?
Oh, yeah.
The Islanders had all kinds of difficulty penetrating. They weren't getting in front of the net. And just before we cut for a commercial, Don said on the air, he said, the only way they're going to do it is to get Big Gillies in there in front of the net. We had just got back on the air. Puck went in off Gillies.
Yeah, right in the corner.
That was one of the best calls.
Yeah, and I said, don't forget, Danny. Tell him I said it. Tell him I said it. You're great, Danny. Rocket's great. I'm great. We're going over the bar with a guy I love, Danny Gallivan. Put it in, Danny. Go on. Now listen, they're going to tear down the forum. Hey, what's going on here?
Well, it's strictly a question of business. I would think with the inflationary trend in hockey, all this money guys like Kevin and Rick are getting. The Canadians, I suppose Ron Corey is saying, look, the place is too small and they cannot add seats. So they want a place with about 20,000. Now, those who are nostalgic, who have the idea of tradition uppermost in their minds, those who are sentimental, those of us who are older, we regret that. But I don't see anything wrong with it. You know, the ghosts of the Forum will always be there. The Morenzas, the Rocket, and the Bellevos, and the Lafleurs, and the Drydens, and the Jeffreys will always be there. But it's going to take some getting used to for the older people. But I think it's good business.
Well, I suppose they're even talking, Harold's even talking about it. Now, I'm going to ask you the question. I'm going out on the limb here. These Montreal guys, you got to be careful. Who's the best hockey player you've ever seen?
Well, here again, I don't want to give the impression I'm hedging, even though perhaps I am. Up until a few years ago, unquestionably, Bobby Orr.
All right, let's say...
Just a second.
Excuse
Bobby
me.
Orr. But I have got to put Wayne Gretzky right alongside Bobby Orr as the two greatest hockey players I have ever seen. 5 years from now, if you invite me back, it could be, from what he has shown, that I will have to say Mario Lemieux.
All right, put her there. You'll be back in 5 years. We'll have you back before then, Daddy. And thanks for joining us. I'll tell you, don't you love it? See you, Kev. Okay, Blow. Take us home. Take us home.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. And Lord willing, we'll be back next week with another episode of the Don Cherry Grapevine podcast.